So I have a question for you, Colonel Waldron. It seems like there's a little momentum building across the country for doing some audits. Um, is that your perception as well?
Yes, and fortunately or unfortunately, I guess depending on workload, um, I've had the chance to meet and talk with Senator Mastriano from Pennsylvania. They're just leaving Maricopa. I'm still in communication with Senator Fan and the rest of the Senate leadership out in Arizona, and a lot of the House members, and Senator Doug Jones in Georgia, and yesterday, and kind of working on some products for senators up in Michigan. So they're all considering a forensic audit of some of the problematic areas, and I believe when they got the insights of what's happening in Arizona and the magnitude of information that's already been discovered, I think they they realize that they're going to have to acquiesce to the wants and demands of the citizens.
Well, we hope that does take place for sure.
There's
Craig,
12 different
Colonel,
states
there is
right now that are in various phases talking to us about help with setting up audits. So it's pretty widespread.
Yeah.
Colonel, there was a group of people that asked a question, and I think burning and everybody, given the fact that there's a new video by Mike Lindell. Thank God he's a patriot and doing what he's doing. 9-0 video that addressed the packet capture, and then the decode and decryption of the packet capture, and along with the embedded information. Could you speak to any of that, please?
I wasn't planning on addressing any of that because it's very, very detailed and you can get down into a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
The members of my team have been working on very specific slices of decryption and analysis of that piece. But again, it takes multifaceted experts to do to put the whole thing together. And so
it's also computationally intensive, right?
Say again.
I said it is also very computationally intensive to crack the encryption.
Yeah, I mean I have one guy working on it literally around the clock for about 2.5 months just to get a few of them using open source tools. So
thank you.
But the IP addresses have all been verified, GeoIP and that, and I know that the PCAP files, we're actually going to try to make a video to show, nobody knows what a PCAP file is. So
right.
Show, okay, this is a PCAP file. This is how it was acquired. This is the open source tools that were
used. Were network captures, yes.
Say again.
There were network captures of the live feed on the internet.
Yeah, so that's something that we're working on. I've got to call Mike this afternoon about another audit here in Texas. So that'll be on the topic of discussion.
Proceed, Colonel.
And I'm just plain old Phil. I'm
okay. All right.
I'm not very formal. Working in a flat organization most of the last part of my career.
Thank you, Secretary of State Ardoin, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Hey, Secretary.
Good afternoon, y'all.
No explanation needed. We're just kicking off now. So Colonel Waldron, who wants to be called Phil, has got the floor. And everybody else, please mute your mics. And we are recording this, Secretary of State Ardoin. So if you need to refer back to any of the comments, then we'll make the video available to you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Okay.
So, Craig, thank you guys for inviting me to have a discussion with you and the senators and legislators from Louisiana, my brothers across the river. So we've already had a pretty good long discussion with Secretary Ardoin, and I believe most of his staff. There was probably a good half a dozen, 8 folks in the room when we went through a lot of this information. There may be some new information that might be relevant. But first off, I'm here as this is a public meeting. I'm here as a private citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of any voting company. I'm not trying to get involved in any contract discussions or negotiations, or saying this is this, for as far as contract, is better than the other or not good. I'm just going to say what our observations were, our team's observations, in looking at some of the available electronic voting systems, and that I read some of the Senate Bill 221. I'm not a lawyer, so I really kind of focused on that summary, and it sounds very, very familiar to what we're doing here in Texas, and that's awesome as far as making forward progress. I would tell you that if you go back and do public record search in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress, there are senators, both Democrat and Republican, who have complained about the vulnerabilities in these voting systems, the electronic voting systems. There are HBO specials that have pointed out the critical vulnerabilities of these. There are professors, Haldeman, Appel, Harry Hursty, lots of different people who have done a lot of work to show the vulnerabilities of these systems. Fortunately, I've been able to travel around and work with a bunch of different state legislatures and officials, and had a meeting of 5 folks who were running for Secretary of State, and had discussions on how can we make elections more transparent, secure, and reinforce the public's confidence that their election matters and that their election counts. The reason for them to show up and vote. So that's really why I'm here. I'm not representing one party or the other. I support the Constitution and free and fair elections. I swore an oath. I stand for the flag and for the republic that flag flies over. So that's a little bit about me, and I think what we were here about. I think a lot of the folks, maybe it's very technical when you look at the certification, when you look at the election ecosystem that has been created. So what we were able to find is that there are flaws even in our election ecosystem. That is the Election Assistance Commission, that are the federally certified laboratories in the Election Assistance Commission. Software that it's really hard to find, but we were able to find on a couple of audits unauthorized software. There was one of the systems. There was an SQL Server Management Studio software installed on some of this equipment that was unauthorized, and by the letter of the Election Assistance Commission, that should have decertified that equipment for that election. So I'm just saying, if the words that you got in Senate Bill 221 to provide an oversight capability, to provide an ability to provide your own checks and balances. Again, I had long conversation with Governor Abbott. I'm a small businessman. I have to have an inspection for food safety, for water quality. I have to get my ice machine inspected. I have to have the backflow preventer for my ice machine checked by a certified backflow preventer inspector. I've got to have my septic inspected. All these things, plus the parts of the business. But when I told Governor Abbott, said there's nobody in the state of Texas that's responsible for inspecting our biggest right, our biggest right as a voter. And he kind of shook his head and he said, "You're right." And I said, "We need to create an election integrity center of excellence." And that's kind of what I see as a parallel to what you've got in your oversight capability or capacity in that Senate bill. We look to our big agriculture and engineering school. I've been across the river I gave a commissioning over at LSU to one of the young warriors that that the state of Louisiana produced and is out serving our country right now is an Army helicopter pilot. One of the most memorable days of my life when I was able to go commission that young man, give him his oath of office. But you know, LSU, you've got technical capabilities. You've got folks that you can create an election integrity center of excellence. They can look not only at the cybersecurity piece of it, they can look at public policy. And what better way for students to learn about our country and about our civic duties than to study it and to make recommendations to the legislature on how to make Louisiana elections better, more secure, and more transparent. So I love those ideas. I love that Senate bill. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legislator, so getting down into the weeds on it didn't really understand, exactly who does what and what it matters. But the commission, it looks like, and for everybody's situation, whereas after the conversation with Secretary Ardoin, one of his staff members reached out and asked us to send them an agreement, a consulting agreement, if maybe we could come help Louisiana with whatever tasks that the secretary of the legislature deemed necessary. Then that, I just want to put that on the table that Secretary Ardoin's staff has reached out to us to potentially come and help with being aware of the election ecosystem in Louisiana. So the fact that these systems, the current systems that we found in the general election in 2020 in both Georgia and in Michigan were connected to the internet, transmitting to the internet, and had unauthorized hardware and software. We found in the ES&S machines a Telit 4G wireless communication chips embedded to the motherboard, and that particular chip was made in Taiwan. We did find that wireless modems were being used for a lot of the data transmissions from the precincts on up. And we know that the election management companies do have the ability to access equipment remotely to make changes and upload. We saw that in Georgia multiple times in two different counties. And those were sworn affidavits before the Senator Doug Jones in the hearing in the Senate, as well as the House hearing, where a poll manager at a precinct got up to her equipment and it was coded for a different precinct. She was able to call the help desk and they were able to remote in and change the information on both the poll pad and the tabulator device they were using. Another incident, the ballots weren't reading correctly in another precinct. They called their EMS company rep who showed up. The election manager would not let anybody touch the equipment. He got out on the phone, called back to higher headquarters, and came back in about 10 minutes. Said try it again, and they all started working. So the equipment is connected. The equipment has the ability to connect outside of the state's communication network. And this wireless wireless chip is a big example of that. So it can connect over anything that emits a wireless signal. My phone has a wireless hotspot capability. A flip phone does the same thing. A hotspot, a little, a puck, a wireless puck. Any of those things, those things can connect to and be accessed when they shouldn't be. So that's problematic. One of the results of the secretaries of state, we had five different states represented. They were looking at cost-effective and secure ways to vote. So people's confidence is returned to voting transparency. So a paper ballot with a dumb scanner, and some even suggested a carbon copy so the voter can take their copy back and say, this is my, it's like in Iraq. I wrote a significant part of the security plan for the 2005 Iraqi elections. When those voters, even when there were, bodies burned along the side of the roads that morning, there were folks that were murdered and beheaded. Those people still came out of that voting center with their blue thumb, and they were excited. Our U.S. Treasury tracks every piece of currency when it goes through a bank. So the $5 bills, the $10 bills, the $20 bills, probably Secretary Ardoin, the 50s and the 100s maybe in your pocket, but those all have serial numbers. That those get tracked every time they go through a bank. And that same concept can work in elections for pennies on what the last thing I talked with the Secretaries of State, they were looking at spending on the elections.
I only have $1 bills.
Say again.
I only have $1 bills in my pocket.
Well, those are handy too. They spend just like the rest of them. But all those serial numbers.
Friday joke, right, Secretary of State? That was your Friday joke for today?
That was my joke for the day.
There you go. Okay. But the reason I say that is because inflation is really picking up.
That won't even get you a Coke.
Isn't that the truth?
But anyway, if a precinct level voting, and I assume I don't know if it's a parish to precinct or it's whatever your polling location is. I think it's still a precinct in Louisiana. Your precinct level judge, if they know they've got their voter rolls, and scrubbing the voter rolls and maintaining accurate voter rolls is a foundation for all this to actually work. But it is for any electronic system as well. If you got 10,000 people in your precinct on your rolls, you print 20 more ballots, 20% more ballots for spoil ballots, for transferred ballots from military absentee or whatever kind of absentee ballots. So at the end of the day, that poll judge say, I started with 1,200 or 12,000 ballots. I had 9,000 out of 10,000 people show up to vote, so I got a 90% turnout. That's pretty dang good. And I had 500 spoil ballots and 500 absentee ballots. So at the end of the day, I've got this many actual ballots, this many spoil ballots, this many absentee ballots that were transferred over to the new ballots by a two-party observer system, just old school. And I got this many blank ballots. So it's just like balancing your checkbook. You could also add in a blockchain, and I did some basic research on one of the blockchain voting companies. And for those of you not familiar with blockchain, it is verifiable transactional data. So if somebody makes votes on a blockchain system, they start with a security code that specifically identifies them and is identified to them, their voter ID number or their driver's license number, or however the secretary and the commission decide to do that. But they can see that vote transactionally going all the way up to the Secretary of State's office, and they know that their vote went from them at their precinct all the way to the Secretary of State's office, and they can see what they voted. Now, anybody else couldn't see that it's their vote because it's compartmentalized. And if that's something that you're interested in, I can, again, not as a result of this conversation, could provide that contact or my basic conversational research to that commission. And I specifically asked this one, the CEO of this one company. I said, so what would the cost be for a state that's right less than 5 million people? So you figure how many voters that would be, and he said, well, far less than probably about $1 a voter. And for an electronic blockchain voting system, and then maybe for 20 cents a voter for the serialized hard copy paper ballots. You can put a carbon copy on there so the voter can get one if you want that option. But there are lots of options that are much more secure than the electronic voting systems that are out there on the market today. And again, that is in the congressional record. It's in the Senate record. It's on HBO. It's out there for public record, in addition to what our teams have found during this election. So
Phil,
with that, I'll be quiet and see if there were any questions or comments or anything that I may be able to provide to the audience as documents or affidavits or anything like that.
Phil, this is Secretary Ardoin. I have
Sir.
a question for you, if you don't mind. You spoke about carbon copies. One of the things I'm most concerned with, and it goes back to Louisiana's history, um, especially our checkered history of ballot boxes. So I'm really concerned about, because we see what fraud we do see is typically on the local level, and it's actually in the community, and it's typically folks trying to trade things for votes, or getting their $5 or what if you will, and that's hard to capture, as you can imagine. So my concern would be is if the voter left with something, then they have something to prove that they voted a certain way, and they could get their beer or their $5 or what have you. And I would be concerned about that. That's not necessarily a requirement of a system like that, correct?
No, some of the folks at this meeting said, well, we've had people who said, I want to take my proof that I voted. And again, you can't, it's really not, I don't think it's our role to question why somebody votes the way they do. As long as they do vote, they've made the decision. And if their vote is to them worth, a 12-pack of beer, then that really lessens their value as a citizen, in my opinion. But you are right, and it wasn't a requirement. It was just a suggestion that because some of their citizens had asked for it or made that suggestion.
But if we were able to, we're looking at, we've been asked to study actually the process of being able to, at least in early voting, it would be hard on election day because we don't have any connectivity anywhere on election day, to confirm that a voter checked in early voting, and send them a text or an email, whichever their preferred methodology is, to let them know that they did check in and they voted that day. That way, if someone did impersonate someone else, then they would know, hey, I didn't show up to the poll that day. I didn't show up to early vote that day. And so that would sort of be a checks and balances for us. So we're going to start looking into that as well. Could you tell me with the dumb scanner, could you explain to me how that would work? Because if a person hand fills out a ballot and that's their proof that they have actually voted, they put it into the scanner is going to at some point tabulate. Are we looking at a system where it would be a air-gapped process, so that we would at the end of the day, sort of like we do with our election day machines and our early voting machines, we would capture on a device, an air-gapped device that would have tabulated all those votes for that day, and then upload that to the Secretary of State's system directly? Is that how that's envisioned? Is that how that would work?
Yes, and there's even been discussion taking it further than having the output device be a burnable DVD or a CD to hold that data, so that the whole thing about the hard copy ballots is they're there to prove the election, to prove a recount or an audit, and the hard copy ballots absolutely have to match the scanned ballot images. One of the things that we were finding in a currently ongoing audit is that the advertised accuracy or the clarity rate of the scan, they're measured in dots per inch, and they're supposed to be a minimum of 200 DPI, and they're only around 90 dots per inch, and so they're a degraded scan ballot image, so it really provides little value for anti-counterfeit. So the dumb scanner, again, you would be make sure that all of the ports were disabled, that it couldn't use a USB device. It would have to be a plot on the ballot design would have to be created so that it read in those boxes where the actual ballot. You would still do the same validity test, but it wouldn't be connected. It wouldn't have the ability to write or change electronically the ballot. And again, you still have the constitutional remedy of that hard copy ballot that's recorded by precinct. You can also, as it's scanned, create a metadata file with a date time stamp so that when you go back and create those scan ballot image, you know that ballot number, whatever the serial number of the ballot is, and they wouldn't have to be sequential so that someone couldn't be identified after they voted. Well, I was number 1192, Jim Bob went right after me, so he must be 1193. Let's go see what 1193 was. So no, they would be, randomized serial number just like on dollar bills, but there would be a block that's assigned to that precinct that could be mathematically recorded.
And the scanner with the DVD system, does that exist today, or is that something that's got to be? I know DVDs exist today, but as far as tabulation is concerned and writing it on a disc, I totally agree with that, because I do believe that's obviously the safest way, because you can see what's on a disc. You can't see what's on a shoot, I'm losing the terminology.
Hard drive, magnetic media.
Yeah, and the stick, because the stick could also be where there's something that's not supposed to be there.
And so the DVD gives you the benefit of being a one-way data transfer, a writable, burnable disk. A USB drive can be, in, out. It can download. One of our guys can program a USB so that if he plugs it in about a second and a half, he can start hopping around all through that system, pulling in passwords and files and everything else. So it doesn't take long for a USB to be put in that's problematic.
Okay, but is there equipment that provides for writing it to a DVD? Yeah.
Yes, we talked with Canon, and they have models of scanners that don't have Wi-Fi connectivity, and you can plug in an output to a writable DVD, a writable DVD file.
Okay.
So there are options that are available for that. You just have to take an existing, like a commercial off-the-shelf scanner. And that we first started talking with them in Fulton County, Georgia, when the first signs of an audit. We were going to go rescan all the ballots, and they just wanted a quote unquote dumb scanner that couldn't be connected, didn't have USB ports, didn't have the ability to scan to USB. And Canon had the solution, the local folks in Georgia there.
Okay, thank you.
And not that that's the only. I'm sure there are many others. That's just the one that we called, and the gentleman was there and kind of Johnny on the spot and helped us come up with a solution that met those strict security requirements.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions in the chat?
Katie and Jock have a question. Their hands raised.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Jacques.
I'll let the lady go first.
Okay. Katie?
This is actually Katie's husband, although I'm often reminded of who the real boss is, though.
Well, I was going to say you're the ugly version of the Alexander clan, huh?
Yeah. Yes, and you learn very quickly. But Colonel Waldron, the question that I had, and I certainly appreciate Secretary of State Ardoin, his participation and all the effort that he's shown in trying to get a good system here. He works tirelessly. My question is there any of all of the vendors, the electronic voting vendors that are out there now? I think there's 3 in the country. Is there any purely electronic voting system out there now that is less vulnerable than the others, or are they all equally vulnerable? And is there any electronic system that is completely invulnerable to fraud, hacking, manipulation?
I would say to Secretary Ardoin's point, when people are involved, there's nothing that's foolproof. So the three main systems that are out there use the backbone of the GEMS system. It's old software. It's vulnerable. Again, as we pulled a 40-page document off Stacey Abrams' website that specifically laid out all the vulnerabilities with the ESNS system. Look at the movie Kill Chain. Look at there's a couple other movies that show all the vulnerabilities. All those vulnerabilities are still there. We saw in Antrim County in the logs usernames and passwords in plain text in the logs. There are hard-coded passwords that are part of the system. So the administrative passwords, you can log into the system pretty much wherever you go because they're hardwired, they're hard-coded into the system. Understanding that these systems are totally different than the technology of blockchain, and blockchain, it's kind of this, not many people understand it. There's another capability called Kubernetes, which creates compartments, or think about a big container ship going out of the port. It's got all these box cars on it. Well, every box would be like a parish. The Secretary of State would be the cargo ship, and every parish would have a container, and that could only communicate back with the Secretary of State in these compartmented systems. So with the way that the electronic voting systems are set up, the publicly available information in the movies Kill Chain, a lot of, again, congressional testimony, they're not secure. What we saw in Antrim County, Michigan was security software that was years and years and years out of date, and systems that were antiquated, and again, as part of the Senate and the House record. So in my opinion, based on what I've seen, based on what I've watched in public information, they're not secure. There's multiple attack surfaces from the server level. And again, I mentioned that Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio being installed on some of those machines. That's even a greater level of vulnerability because you can go in and change at the database level. I had a long conversation with a senator from Michigan and provided him a bunch of documents and a couple of links to videos last night. They're looking at the same thing in Michigan as kind of a post hoc review of what happened, why was it that bad, and what do we do about it going forward.
Let me ask a quick follow-up, if I could, Colonel Waldron. So and I know that you're not a legislator, obviously, but I want to ask you a question. If you were writing the language regarding secure paper ballots and you want that the implementation was faithfully executed and that they understood exactly what they needed to do, what is the language that you would use regarding secure paper ballots? I mean, most of the legislation out there, it's got it in there, but what would your language be?
I mean, I think the easiest, most secure way is that precinct level voting. So you've got a control, any scientific, any scientific experiment, you got a control. So the number of voters in that precinct. Again, this requires accurate voting rolls. It requires, checking back with Secretary Ardoin's database, the state troopers database, that yes, this is where this person lives, this is their voting number, their driver's license number, and this is where they're registered to vote, and they're not registered to vote in 3 other counties or this apartment or their last. And the one thing good about a blockchain solution is that would take care of itself. You'd have one person, they would have that secure link to vote. So you couldn't cheat more than just one person at a time. But I think that the language would be numbered ballots by precinct. That way you can order the ballots by that precinct. So it's got the school board, sheriff, constable, dog catcher, every race that's going on in that precinct, and it can be pre-recorded for the primaries and the general. So you'd know as part of the precinct and the parish processes. You get a serial number ballot, again, non-sequential serial number, but so that you've got a set number of ballots ordered for each precinct. So there's 100% accountability at the end of the voting day or the voting counting period that this precinct had X amount of ballots. We're turning in X amount of ballots. This many were voted, this many were spoiled, this many were absentee, transferred, and this many were blank and turned back in. It's just like it's a balance in a checkbook act. So I don't know if I answered your question because I've never written laws, so I don't know.
I think this is Michael. I think that the simple language makes it easy for everyone to understand. Too many times we see legislation that confuses anybody with shall we say, a logical, rational mind. So a follow-up to your statement, that procedure could also be applied in early voting as well as the day of voting, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you don't have to change your procedures from early voting to day of voting.
Correct.
Okay. Jacques, I think you had
to
a
get
question.
mailed out ballot because they were
right. If you mail them out, they'd be
sick. They were in a hospital. They were on military leave. Then they get it. The precinct sends it, and they got a count of that ballot. I sent this one to Johnny, and Johnny was in the hospital. I sent it to this ballot. Okay, and I got it back 4 days later. One other thought while we're waiting to get unmuted. I think just looking at totally taxpayer dollars. I think if you went to an alternative and even added a blockchain solution, you could, if you're talking, I think Secretary Ardoin, you mentioned like $100 million budget or something. I think you could do the whole election cycle for $10 million. Then you could build a heck of an election integrity center of excellence, either an oversight capability for the legislature or expanded capacity for the secretary's office for cleaning up the voter rolls and managing this system, and still save the taxpayers, $80 million or more, if that's something that's relevant or important. Sorry, Ms. Lenore.
No, money's always important. Taxpayer money, is the most important thing. So I'm listening. My ears are wide open.
So, Colonel, you said the blockchain could be done for about $1 per voter. Did I hear that correctly earlier?
Yes.
Okay.
I talked to the CEO of one blockchain voting company, and I know several states that ran their system this past election cycle. And he said with a scale, if it was a statewide, if it was a state of, I think 4.5 million, something like that, you could definitely do it for a dollar a voter. And then you can, I think what Mark Fincham from Arizona, some of the research he did, you can have anti-counterfeit measures put in ballots with serialized ballots for 20-30 cents per vote.
Can you share the states that actually use the blockchain?
West Virginia, and I believe Denver, and I could get that gentleman to send
share it
you
with us. Yeah, that'd be great.
Directly, Secretary, again, because I'm not to get in between.
No, I understand.
Contracting
good.
and business side of it.
So I'm sorry, Phil. I know I'm butting in, gang. I'm sorry. Have you worked with Secretary Warner, Mac Warner of West Virginia, at all?
I have not.
Okay.
West Virginia is one of the states that we didn't light in, so I haven't. I just know from some folks from West Virginia that they shifted it, and when I was doing some of the research on. Because people always ask, well, what else? What's the other options? So I had to do some research. So
now, Colonel, sorry, who was that? I apologize.
This is Craig Skier. I was going to try and ask a question, but go ahead.
to your point, Colonel, would you consider the blockchain voting more secure than the Dominion, the ES&S, and the Hart machines?
Yes, blockchain. Again, when you make a banking transaction, you make a transaction that's secure to your bank, and then you got that on your ledger, right?
Okay.
So that's the same type. It's verifiable transactional data, and
Right.
that you can see it from beginning to end, and it doesn't erase because it's your data. And so,
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
you voted, at your precinct, you've got your secure ID number that is specifically associated with your driver's license or voter ID number, and verified by the state of Louisiana, either the Secretary of State's rolls or the DPS, or however that data is shared. And you've got the ID. You go there, you verify it, you go and you see your vote all the way through that system.
That's fantastic. So it's going to be cheaper and more secure than the Dominion systems and the other systems. And the $100 million, we have roughly 3.2 million registered voters in Louisiana. The Secretary can probably give you the exact number, but I'm just going off the website. We were going to be spending about $32 per voter on the $100 million Dominion bid. That was the bid that was in earlier in the year. And Georgia spent $107 million in 2019, which comes out to about $14 per voter. So I mean, we're looking at a significant cost differential there. We were going to be spending twice as much per voter as Georgia, and then compared to what you were saying, over 30 times as much.
Okay.
But that was my entire question. It was relating to the cost. So I'm going to go ahead and yield to the next person. Thank you
Okay,
very
I
much.
wanted to take a stab, Colonel, at the language, even though I'm an electrical engineer and not an attorney. And so it goes like this: hand-marked secure paper ballots shall be the document of record for all voting, period. A definition of secure paper ballot is security by paper manufacturing, security by ink and ink patterns, and another independent layer of security added by blockchain. That, if I could be a legislator today, that would be what I'd write in my law. What do you think, Colonel?
And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of any company. I'm just kind of talking. So that would be something that the Secretary's commission would have to explore and reach out and ensure. But those ballot numbers could be integrated, I believe, to a blockchain voting system very easily at the precinct level, because this company that I talked to does ballot design. It does, soup to nuts, the whole experience. But again, I didn't get that detailed into the discussion, and I didn't discuss what type of language would need to be included in the
Colonel.
legislation.
Okay, Chris York, you have a question?
Yeah, I have actually more of a comment that my role in this is I used to work for Sequoia Voting, which became part of Dominion a number of years ago. And the people at Sequoia, when I was there, admitted that they were using back-end access directly into the database on election night. So anything that's more secure than just a SQL Server security or anything, and what the Colonel's talking about with blockchain is obvious. I mean, if you're in the business, it's obviously more secure. There will become a day that somebody figures out how to get around it. But right now, I don't think that they can, and it needs to be watched constantly. So it was just more of a comment, because I know that the people in at least one voting company were looking at being very fraudulent, and actually we're doing it.
And Chris, that's a great point. But what I saw in the language of Senate Bill 221 was that it authorized or charged the Secretary with creating a robust oversight capability, and that again, if you got the best minds in the universities in Louisiana. You've got an academic approach, a scientific method. Use the smart people that you got at your universities, and charge them with transparency and academic rigor and review, and then with the potential savings, you can fund that and do research into the next generation voting system for post quantum. We're looking now at quantum computing, making everything that we're doing now irrelevant, and every piece of security that we have now irrelevant in potentially 5 years. So who knows what's next?
Well, I think you brought a good point up there, Colonel. Because if things are changing that fast, we want to minimize the investment in a technology that's going to turn over every 18 months. And we all know that that's true for those of us who've worked in industry for a while, because we're continuing to invest in newer technology, and we have to bring out new things every 18 months at a minimum these days. So
we still live with a lot of paper, Michael, and I would argue we live with a hell of a lot more paper, even though we have technology.
Well, I wasn't going to argue the point about paper. I still think the paper ballot is the record that we need to solidify in all of our legislation. So I don't want to see, personally, I don't want to see any electronic computer-based system anywhere in voting. And I like what you said about Canon also. Phil.
The good thing about the blockchain and the paper system is you got two tracks on the railroad track, so you can check each one against each other, and hopefully the train gets to the station at the end. So
yeah, they have to reconcile, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yeah. It's fully auditable and verifiable.
All right. So Lenore, you have a question? Your hand's up.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm on my phone now, so it's, I can do this. Thank you. Colonel, would you have a description of what type of paper we should use? Because we're having, Christopher kind of about the secure paper ballot. And then Secretary Kyle Ardoin was saying he wasn't sure about the definition of secure paper ballot. He couldn't really find something in, I guess, current state statutes. Is there a particular paper? Like, we thought it should be encrypted, maybe layered. I mean, is there anything other? I mean, I heard you say something about the, the sequence and numbered, but is there any type of paper that we should use, or can we just use our original provisional ballots that we already print for absentee ballot purposes?
There are a lot of countermeasures, and people in the banking industry are going to have the most current relevant information, because that's where they live. So anti-check counterfeiting capabilities and technology, your dollars, your currency has cloth strands put in it in certain places. There's things that pop up on UV light. So there's different patterns that can be put in there, and they only, it can be by design. So I think if the secretary didn't see a specific language, as long as, I don't know how it's written. If there's a box that puts you in that, yes, you do these three things that you check off, said, yes, it's got this anti-counterfeit measure. It's got this means that I can detect if somebody runs it through a color laser jet printer and tries to print a fake. The numbers, if it's numbered and serialized, that will prevent that. So even with blockchain, if I think to Michael's point, if I have my user number and my secure ID on a blockchain transaction, I can vote 100 times, but my certificate is shown and used, but it'll only register as one time. Versus the paper ballots and the ballot generating devices, you can print off 100 provisional ballots and run them through the same machine done on voting day. So any type of serialized paper ballot that the secretary's commission looks at, and that's approved by and meets the requirements of the legislature. Again, that's a non-answer, but I think very rudimentary anti-counterfeit measures would suffice for your precinct level voting.
So, Phil, this is Michael again. Sorry for me to interject there, Lennar, but I think what you're suggesting is the paper ballots would be used in all elections, both federal and state or local. That way we have a consistency regardless of what jurisdiction we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, people are creatures of habit, and once they learn something, it becomes easy and second nature.
Right.
So okay. I think it allows your election officials, to develop their list of Louisiana state approved ballot producers, and they have a minimum standard of process, a minimum grade of paper, this many counterfeit measures, a UV, specific UV marking per precinct that's in a different place, so something like that, so that the judge can just get a hand-wand UV light and go over the 3 inches down and 2 inches in from the top right corner. Boom. Okay, there's my UV signal, and that's the right one. So there's something as simple as that.
That's very good. We have another hand raised here by Miss Mari. Mari, you have a question? You can unmute yourself.
I do, and this is kind of a dual question for Secretary Ardoin and Colonel. We have a really good front end, I believe, for our paper ballots. It's pretty secure. And where we couldn't figure out, because we have paper ballots for early voting and for provisional voting, and then they go to dead scanners at the clerk of court's office, and then they're calibrated. And I don't know, I'm in Baton Rouge where the Secretary of State is, so I don't know where we hit a dead end if we were to use this statewide. Is what's the safest way to get this data transmitted to the Secretary of State in a timely manner without having cards or whatever that could be hacked? Because I think we keep our voter rolls pretty clean, and I think we have a good process for our paper. I don't know where we're getting our paper ballots from, and I wanted Secretary Ardoin to answer if this would be possible to instill throughout.
So I appreciate the question, because I was going to say we use a very specialized proprietary paper that is the scanners detect by weight and composition and timing security marks, so that if any ballot is replicate or duplicated as a blank and then mailed in, it's not going to scan. The scanner won't recognize it and will kick it out. But it's a good point in terms of how we would be able to implement this on a statewide basis. It would alter our system completely. And we'd have to go way deep into the weeds with it. But I certainly think that if we are able to utilize, as Michael said, and I appreciate that, if it's a simple definition without complicating it, and we can utilize our normal security measures that we currently use with our absentee ballots on a statewide level, then I think we're in good shape. And we'd have to look at various vendors out there that would do the serialization, I think is what the Colonel referred to, or at least some sort of specialized marking on the precinct level. And then the issue will be, how do you get, and I think this is what I was discussing with the Colonel early on in our conversation, how do we get the information from the scanner to the Secretary of State's office? Currently, the way we do it from our precinct level machines is that the cartridge and a print tape of the tabulation is brought directly to the clerk's office by the commissioner in charge. And I think that's what the Colonel's referring to as the judge. I think that's what they call them in other states. And then that's uploaded on a secure line that's monitored 24/7 by our office, and it is only used for the uploading to the Secretary of State system.
I
And
thought we used AWS. That's what someone else said, that we were using AWS.
AWS for
From-
submitting
from the
results.
clerk
Amazon
of-
services.
Yes, from the clerk of court office to your office, not from our parish, but to another, from other parishes, they're using Amazon Web Services. And it is our server, but it's really a space we rent from Amazon. So I'm asking the Colonel, what would be a good way to get this information to the Secretary of State in a timely manner where we're secure? Because I think we're secure up to the point of the clerk of court office.
There are, and I think there you've got electrical engineers and cyber folks on this call, but there are point-to-point VPNs. There are post-quantum VPNs that are already out there where you can send data point-to-point. I know I'm working with one right now that is quantum resistant and DDoS resistant, and something's feeding back. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna disable the mic. Okay, go ahead, Phil.
So you can create point-to-point transitions to go to a physical server at the Secretary of State's office, and there are parts that I know this new capability. It's being used in vehicle to satellite to drone technology right now to ensure that the signal doesn't get interrupted or corrupted in any way. So those type of capabilities, again, if Secretary Ardoin's talking with his staff, the system that they have is a standalone system, but maybe there are ways to improve it with the commission that was authorized or put forward in the Senate Bill 221. So if that, there are a lot of ways you can harden your data with VPNs, with like a wormhole VPN and adaptive firewalls, point-to-point, multi-point to single-point server type activities. So there's ways to do it. And again, one of the things that Secretary Ardoin's staff wanted us to do was come look and see what we got and make recommendations on how to harden things and make it again more secure and still be have that core component of transparency to the voters.
That was good. Thank you. I have a question from John. Let me. He raised his hand. John, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Craig, I really thank you so much for your hard work to get this set up, and you're really fighting for integrity in elections in Louisiana, and really so many of the people on this call. And Colonel Waldron, all you're trying to do is rescue America from our the potentially somewhat of an electoral abyss. But and this is just a suggestion or a comment, and I'll get off quick so y'all can tell me where I'm right or wrong. But it almost, and I may understand that the context of this conversation is technical, but ultimately the answer isn't simply technology, it's integrity. And in Louisiana, our problem is Colonel Waldron is the one that's helped America document and understand the communist Chinese control of Dominion. And then we find, coincidentally or not, that Dominion is used in 6 of the battleground states where millions of Americans believe that electoral misconduct. And I'm not trying to get you to say anything edgy, Colonel, please understand. But I'm just saying that someone did that to me earlier today, and I'm not sure I totally resisted the temptation. But I guess my point is, if all this stuff is good, why is the Secretary of State's continually been trying to apparently to steer us towards Dominion, which many of the people in this state and nation do not trust? And why hasn't Mr. Secretary, have you shown an initiative to get paper ballots so we can protect integrity? And I have to ask this question. I'm not understanding that either the contracts that the state has with Dominion have been made public, and I'm not understanding that Louisiana officials, let alone any candidates or voters, have been allowed any opportunity, directly or indirectly, to examine, monitor, or inspect the actual hardware or software.
So John, I do appreciate your comments here, but
And
that
that's
we
the
really,
other-
yeah, this really wasn't the forum to have that kind of Q&A. We're really trying to just air out what are the real possibilities and what are some logical constructs that we can take from this to help Louisiana move to the most safe and secure voting system possible and to minimize the cost to the taxpayers. Now, I have one question along that line, and then I'll give it over to the next hand
and I
raised.
will say, Craig, it is your show, so I respect that. And I do want to thank you, Craig, and Colonel Waldron. Thank you for the stand that you've taken on behalf not only of, well, really of states all over America. But thank you, Craig, and thank you, Colonel.
Yeah.
Well, Craig, and if I could, some of the language that we were working to get in the Texas legislature's bill is that anyone applying for a contract for voting would have to have full disclosure on their business arrangement, and it could not be a foreign-owned company, and that would include holding companies, parent companies, private equity firms, anyone who had an interest, a financial interest in the company, with total board of directors list, and that's just transparency. Also mentioned to Governor Abbott that the voting lab for the state of Texas would have to have access to 100% of the hardware. Texans want to know how the vote is being processed, what the software looks like, and I work. I've handled top secret material. I operate under non-disclosure agreements all the time. So that to me is a non-argument, because intellectual property protection is covered under fiduciary non-disclosure agreements all the time. So that was some of the language that we asked Representative Parker and Briscoe Kane to make sure stayed in the language of the Texas bills. And I think we had that same discussion with Secretary Ardoin, and they were also looking at some of that same language, so that there is disclosure and that there is availability to, so that the citizens of Louisiana had confidence that the state officials had at least been able to look and examine and inspect the equipment to know that it's good, that it doesn't have SQL Server Management Studio installed on it when it's not supposed to, that it doesn't have a Telit 4G wireless chip hardwired onto the motherboard. And so that's why, because in my opinion, the federal election ecosystem has failed us. And like Ken Cuccinelli said, DHS doesn't have the authority to go down. That's a state responsibility. Okay, if it's a state responsibility, get out of the way. We're going to grab the reins and make it happen. We're going to do what we need to do for the citizens of our states. So,
Colonel,
that's exactly how we feel, Phil.
That's music to my ears, Phil. That's music to my ears as an electrical engineer of LSU. So I understand the technology, and the technology gets deep really very, very fast. And I like the idea of our engineering departments under fiduciary non-disclosure agreements being entitled to examine the state's election systems to ensure the integrity. And I think that's an outstanding idea. My question to you, Colonel, is would you, and Mr. Secretary, because time is of the essence, Sharon Hewitt is working on bills right now. I would love for her to borrow from Texas this excellent language and make sure it's in our state for the protection of Louisiana. Sir.
So
and in the comments, Secretary Ardoin said he thinks that is in the Hodges bill, but I'm not sure. I don't think I've read that one, but he said it needs to be added to the Hewitt bill. Is that 221?
Yes,
221 is Hewitt.
4 is Representative Hodges' bill, and she does have good language. But let me say, Colonel, Texas is leading the way here, and I've spent 13 years of my life in Texas. So I would ask that they share the language in the Texas legislature with our elected officials, and I hope our elected officials are not too proud to say thank you, Texas.
Well,
So
go ahead, Kyle.
I've asked, my staff is already reviewing the Texas legislation. We got it earlier in the week, and so they're reviewing it for additional language. So hopefully, whatever we come up with as suggestions from that will be included in whatever legislation is moving through the process. And I do have to jump on another call, but I just wanted to say I appreciate the time, and Colonel Waldron, I do appreciate you extending yourself to us, and we will continue our conversations with you and your team and moving forward. This has been a big help for us. And I want to end with this. I've spoken, I was on a call earlier because I'm on the executive committee for the National Association of Secretaries of State, and we had a call with the nominee for the Department of Homeland Security, and I did specifically ask if she would focus in on enabling DHS to do investigations of the voting equipment manufacturers and ties to other countries, including our adversaries like Russia and China. And so I'm hoping that will be a something that is accomplished as DHS, because I think that's a function that they need to provide for our country in order to know who's involved from an outside perspective within our elections, within our republic. And so I'm not going to give that up. I will become the president in the next couple of months, and that's going to be on my agenda pressing throughout my tenure as president of that association.
Secretary Ardoin, but before you go, I wanted to cover one point, if we could, just a few more seconds here, and to follow up with what Colonel Waldron said a few minutes ago. Do you have any objection? I would think you would not have any objection to recommending language in the legislation that prohibits the awarding of a election company contract to any corporation or company that is partially or wholly owned or by a foreign country or a foreign company, and if so, or a subsidiary of a foreign company? And do you have any objection to including in the legislation full disclosures as far as interest and ownership in whatever companies we choose to award the contract to? I think Colonel Waldron emphasized the importance of that, and I think that is in the Texas legislation. So would you recommend that for our legislation?
I do recommend that, and I'll go a step further. Yeah, I recommended that in the RFP, full disclosure by any company that was bidding for this, including connections, the board of directors and their businesses, any ownership by any foreign entity and what that ownership looks like, that sort of thing. So I continue on that because I think the transparency is the major part. And if the legislature is willing to pass legislation that says that they cannot participate in it, then I don't have a problem with that, because I don't want any foreign ownership, and I never have wanted any foreign ownership. I'm stuck right now in a contractual arrangement that I inherited, and until we can get out of that we're stuck with what we have. And so the sooner we move, the better. And I really appreciate the input of thus far.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Secretary Ardoin, for the time that you took today to listen and monitor and field the questions. And we only have a few days left in this session, as you well know. So your focus on these important points with the Senate and the representatives in the House here in Louisiana is of utmost importance. And they do listen to you. So if you get behind something, I think it has some weight. If you're not pushing on them hard, they may not take it seriously. So we appreciate anything that you can do to get the verbiage correct in these several bills that are out there today.
We are 20 minutes over the Colonel's budget.
I know we are. I know we are.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate
that, Secretary Ardoin. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Secretary. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah. So, Lennar, you had a question. I apologize that we
Oh, that's okay. Just a quick question, just for clarification, Colonel. When we talked about the hand-marked secure paper ballots going through the dumb optical scanner, falling into a lockbox, and then if we continue with, they take the flash drive out and they go to the second, it's brought to the clerk of court's office. And if the information is burned onto a CD-ROM and then it is sent up to the Secretary of State's office, do we still need that VPN or point-to-point? Some of the transmission from the clerk of court's office to the Secretary of State's office, some of it is done on a dedicated fiber line, and some areas actually go on a T1. So, I mean, and as you know, a T1, it's going to be travel just from hub to hub, and it's going to, it's going to go over all kind of different carriers, perhaps even just to get to the Secretary of State's office. But do you think if it's burned onto that CD-ROM, because it's not raw data, that it is more secure that way on the burned CD-ROM?
Yeah, I think the burned CD-ROM is much more secure because it's a single transactional unit versus a USB, which is read, write, up and down. There's ways, and I know a couple of electrical engineers. There's this capability called Kubernetes, and it's kind of that analogy of the container ship that could be that enclave that would be owned by the state, the Secretary of State, and then provide compartments, and that is just about as secure as you can get for point-to-point transmission of data. I haven't really looked at what an enterprise cost for something like that would be, but it's the way that the military, the Air Force, the Army Futures Command are going. They're using it's called a zero trust environment and a Kubernetes background. So it's like if all the 9 boxes on this screen, we were all in one enclave, but I wanted to send one document that I only wanted Craig and Michael to have access to. I wanted another document that Katie, Kimberly, Jacques, and Lennar, you would have access to, and I had a third document that I had everybody have access to. So the way that Kubernetes works is it shares information securely but specifically. So the voting data from the precinct to the parish can be transmitted via CD-ROM and also the backup tapes, and then the data could be transmitted through a Kubernetes or a compartmented communications capability up to the Secretary of State securely. And again, it's transactional. So it's just like a banking transaction. From we sent it from Lake Charles, we sent it to the Secretary of State at this time, this many data bytes, this many votes, blah blah blah, and it's verifiable from point to point. So that the data packet has not been intercepted or changed.
Okay. All right, good. I'm going to learn a little bit more about that Kubernetes. I'm not too familiar with that, but I'll try to do a little bit research.
Containerized data, non-DNS. The newer systems work outside of the distributed net system, the DNS system, so they're less vulnerable to TCP/IP spoofing and interference.
But in the interim, we have the state police that can transport from the various clerks of court to Baton Rouge, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out.
It's what we did in Baghdad. We had a primary vehicle and a chase vehicle. We got to a helipad. We got it on an aircraft that had a gunship escort and flew it back for the final counts.
Well, I don't know if we need the gunship, but I would vote for it. Okay, is there any other questions?
Yeah, and thanks again, Colonel Waldron. And I'm really hoping, and I really would like to tell you how much I appreciate your talking with Secretary Ardoin too, because he has seemed to really he's been very cooperative, and I think that he really realizes after having a conversation with you and speaking with you the necessity of hand-marked secure paper ballots, and he's really working with us to try to accomplish that. So through SB 221, we're hoping that at least becomes one of the systems that will be presented to the committee, and we'll try to do our best to make that the winner. That's what we're going to
Awesome.
do. Yeah, so thank you so much. We appreciate
Thank
that.
y'all for having me, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Have
Yes,
a great.
we'll keep in
Thank
touch and let you know our progress, Phil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Craig.
so much,
Michael.
Thank you so
Phil.
much,
Yes, sir.
Colonel, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you all.
absolutely.
Y'all.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Yep.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Colonel.
Take care.
All right.
Bless.
Have a great weekend, Phil.
I appreciate it. I will. I'm working on it. I got to get back
All
to
right.
work now.
Yeah, that's right. Now it's getting close to beer 30 though.
But only 2 more working days till Monday.
Yeah, only 2 more working days. Now wait a
5
minute.
o'clock somewhere.
Sunday you got to take off now, Phil. Come on.
All
We
right, y'all
got
take care.
to give glory to the one that counts, right?
I know.
Thank
right
y'all,
now,
everyone, for coming.
There's more on the list than I can scratch off.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, God bless you.
Y'all
Thanks.
take
God
care.
bless you.
Cheers.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye, everyone.